Alrighty, so today we have Mark Gray from the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina, and he has been a great resource even for me. He and I met about 2 years ago or so at a coffee shop, and he gave me a document that I still reference on a regular basis when I'm discussing church planting with some other guys who are looking at Winston, looking at different places. But his group at the State Convention for church planters has done a lot of missiological research on the state of North Carolina, and so he's going to share with us today a little bit about how they help planters do demographic studies, how they analyze those, and even coach potential planters on just how to really understand the data coming in and how that can help lead to a church plant. So, Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm really honored to be with you guys today. I appreciate the work that you do there in equipping church planting missionaries, and I'm grateful for the church planting missionaries you have there in your class that God has called out to go and reach the world for Him. So I'm very honored and grateful to have this opportunity today.
Excellent. Well, we do appreciate your time, and basically, tell us a little bit about what you do for the state convention, your role there, and how your team helps church plants. So give us a little description of that.
Sure. I've been with the State Convention of North Carolina for just a little over 10 years, the last 9 years as team leader for church planting, and we have responsibility. Our assignment is all of North Carolina in the church planting area. Language groups, different type of people groups. We can maybe talk about that. We find them a little bit later. But we have a team of specialists who work in different areas across the state. We have some that are geographical, as in town and country. We have a specialist there. We have people who are language specialists. We have an Asian consultant. We also have a and then different areas with their types of people groups. So we have a lot of diversity. You know, there are over 300 different languages spoken in the homes of school children in North Carolina. So we're a very diverse group. So yeah, we work to assess, to equip, and to coach our new church planters, and we're about 100 new churches per year in the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina.
Wow.
That churches and associations to send out to communities for the Lord Jesus.
Well, that's amazing, and I know firsthand we've in our class this semester I've already had someone who has directly benefited from your groups helping with assessing and equipping and coaching Jason Lefford of Tapestry Church, and I know good friends of mine who will be speaking in this class from Revo Church, Nathan Klein and Wes Johnson. I know they've done a good bit with you folks, and several others. So we're grateful for your ministry to our state, and we are thankful for the partnership that we have here at Piedmont with the state convention of just really we step right alongside what you folks do to impact lostness through disciple making, and we want to do that as well, and so we primarily do that through the education side, and you guys do it from everything else, from getting churches involved to raising funds to the coaching and assessing and doing a lot of networking and connecting, and so I think we're a good partnership for our state, and so thank you for what you do there for the team that you lead. I want to ask you a few questions today related to this week's topic for the class. We are discussing essentially how to kind of map out and understand the community that a person may be planning a church in, and with that comes a good understanding of demographic analysis, understanding who lives there, and so there's a lot of demographic analysis that you can do before you even move to a city. If you happen to be moving to a different town or a different area, there's many things you can do online and other things, and then there's other side of research where you're on the ground getting to know people, and so there's a good balance of doing both and not putting one over the other, and I think your team does that really well with doing both, helping with the numbers, so to speak, but also helping with what it looks like on the ground. So let me ask you this: how when you do have a planter who says, "I'm looking to plant a church in this city in North Carolina," how exactly do you get demographic analysis data for them?
Yes, we just have a contract with a company called Mission Insight, and they're able to give us area of our state. We can do that by way of a radius of 3 mile or 5 mile of a detail the area that our church might need. That be new churches or existing churches. So I say sometimes with tongue in cheek, we sometimes know more about people than they know about themselves as it
Wow.
relates to their communities. We have some detail. I can tell you in some communities whether they're more prone to have arthritis, pain, back pain, whether they're more prone to go to Red Lobster or McDonald's. And all those kind of things are indicators of the socioeconomic strata in a given area. So we do this is really important. I would add to that, it's important not only that we communicate a given area and the demographics there, but our experience has been that a church planter is most effective at reaching people like himself. For example, we believe a church planter is most effective in a demographic or people group like he was at age 30. We also know that he'll be most effective at reaching people in the 20-year window. Older than he, 10 years younger, but easier to reach down than to reach up. So therefore, it's critical that he understand himself, but also that he understands the target group he's seeking to reach. By illustration, I had a call some weeks ago, a wonderful man call. He's about 65, 66 years of age. He sounded like, and he said, "Brother Gray, I'm in the mountains of North Carolina, and I believe God is calling me to reach these 20 and 25-year-olds who don't go to church anywhere." And I commended him for his burden and his passion to reach those folks for the Lord Jesus. And, through a series of coaching questions, I began finally to ask him, "Now tell me, how many of your close friends are 20 to 25 years of age like you're seeking to reach?" And obviously he got very quiet on the other end of the phone
Yeah.
because he was reaching to seek a people group which he did not match, of course. And what I ended up leading him to do, of course, is perhaps being a partner, a prayer partner, and leading him.
But I did gather that essentially, just the last little bit went out there for just a second. But with this gentleman, you essentially just found a new role for them. Instead of maybe being that planter for the 20 to 30-year-olds, maybe he's best in just mobilizing his church to help support someone who is doing that. And so really that demographic research that you help with really helps coach a guy to see if they are really a good fit for that particular community. And if they're not, it doesn't mean they have to step out of church planting. It just means that they may not be the best fit for that particular area. And so I think that's a good use. That's actually an idea of the demographic research that I never really thought through, of how that could actually help in that kind of, helping them give a snapshot on paper that maybe they may not be the best fit for this, but there's either another location or another role that they can play. And so I think that's key. That's essential. So when as you're gathering this analysis, what does your team do as far as in a coaching role with the planter? As they've got the demographic numbers, and maybe they have or haven't even moved to that community yet. How do you coach them to understand the numbers that they're seeing on the page?
Sure. Well, the first thing that we commend all of our church planters to do is the demographics that they do have in hand, they must be verified on the field. So just because these things are on paper, they may get to the community and realize maybe it's just a little different than what they had envisioned from what they saw on the paper. So we believe that all demographics have to be verified on the field. So we encourage them to get out in the community, to visit the existing churches, the pastors who are there, to find out what's going on, let them know what one's vision might be. And then as we look at these different people groups, different target We want to help them understand how those people tick. What are their needs, for example? One of the most unreached areas of North Carolina, actually, is that right there and very near your university. And we know that area has a tremendous number of people who are single mothers, for example. Well, obviously, that reveals to us a need and a bridge which we can speak into the lives of those people and help them to understand the importance of following the Lord Jesus, experiencing Him through salvation, becoming a mature disciple, and that will impact their family values. So we're looking to help them to understand the needs of communities as well, and also communication patterns. For example, that particular lost area of North Carolina I'm speaking of there, I think it's on Mulberry Street near the university. The primary means of communication with those folks is through local TV. That's their they would have self-indicated that's their greatest way of finding out what's going on in the world. It's not print media, for example.
Okay.
So we're looking for different ways to understand them, how they tick, and then to build bridges into them. So we ask coaches, what are you doing folks who live here in this community, and what kind of strategies have been effective, and obviously what are you finding not effective? Every time you go fishing, you don't always catch fish. You may have to change tackle, you may have to change bait, but we need to know the fish we're fishing for, and then to develop a strategy to reach those people with the gospel. The mistake, Dustin, that we find regularly is a planter will come and say, I'm going to plant a church that looks like this.
Right.
And the problem with that is they're starting with the church as opposed to the fish they're trying to catch. And it's the context that determines the strategy, not some kind of vision I have for church that I saw somebody else do effectively in their context. But we want to start with the context, the fish we're fishing for, and then develop our strategy around that particular context. So our coaches, our consultants, help a guy to think through how do you reach these particular folks with the gospel. The way you reach cowboys, for example, might be kind of different than the way you would reach people who live in the country.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad you said that. We discussed just last week about selecting a church planting model and or an approach, and basically the whole premise was don't choose it years before you go plant, because you get to a city, and even in that community, even within the same city, you may have 3 different approaches needed for the city, because each community is even more different from its neighboring community. And so we said get to know the people, and then see, okay, well, what approach, which a house church or a more traditional approach, or a gathered scatter, kind of what Stetzer calls a missional incarnation. Let's really see what the community, what would fit them best, and then let that be. And so we jokingly said, don't marry a model.
Absolutely.
I believe my wife is a supermodel, but we say don't marry a church planting model, because once you get married to it, you're very unwilling to adapt and be flexible once you get to location. Then you end up trying to impose an approach. And so I think it's brilliant how the demographics help to make sure that, like this area in Winston, you talk of TV being their main form, but then you don't want to spend all your advertising money on print flyers or newspaper ads. You may want to look at TV commercials or something to that effect. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Let me ask you there's you mentioned some of the higher pockets of lostness in North Carolina that even there were one or at least 2 here in Winston-Salem that I'm familiar with. Actually, Piedmont is very close to one, and my home where my wife and I live is very close to the other, and that was actually part of our reason for buying a home there. How has the demographics studies of the state kind of influenced the strategy for church planting coming out of the state convention, as far as where to send guys to?
Sure. We have contracted with a company that helped us to identify the top 250 pockets of lostness in North Carolina. Usually these are a 3-mile radius. If it's high density, it might be a 1.5-mile radius, or in a rural area, it might be a 5-mile radius. But bottom line, we're looking for areas where there is the greatest pocket of unreached. Now, unreached, we use that term because a lot of folks will say they're a member of a church. But that doesn't mean they attend, doesn't mean they've really been reached with the gospel. It's just they've had some connection in days past. So because of what's called the halo effect, a lot of people would like you to think they go to church. They may tell you they go to church, but research indicates perhaps they really don't. So we know, for example, in this area that we're discussing, we know about, let's see, 71% of the people in that pocket there near the school are unreached. So we want to help folks there, for church and missionary church planters like in your class who will partner with us and will seek to go and plant a new church in that particular circle where there's the greatest number of lost people. So we have those areas, those pockets ranked, and as you would imagine, most of the higher rankings are in the major cities like Winston-Salem. I think the area near you is the 29th most unreached area of our state. So we are identifying, we're communicating, and we're praying God will burden the hearts of our existing churches in North Carolina and church planting missionaries to go into these areas where the need is so very great.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy, and it really mirrors what the Southern Baptist Convention does through the North American Mission Board of targeting the top 32 cities in North America that have the highest percentage of lostness. And so it's a very similar strategy, and it's not that we think the other areas, because they have a slightly higher percentage of Christians, doesn't mean we don't need new churches there. It just means sometimes we do have to focus resources on those most unreached, so that we can get them to the same percentage level, so to speak, of the other areas, and then we can work better together, holistically across a region. So I do appreciate the strategy you folks employ there, and I believe that is a valuable strategy, especially when we don't have an endless supply of funds, but we do have an endless supply of grace and the Holy Spirit, and so we will use those to hit every area. But we do have to be wise with the money and the funding, and strategic. We can reach some of these areas. You start reaching Winston-Salem, and you eventually start to reach other surrounding areas like Rural Hall and King and Walnut Cove and Walkertown, and it'll trickle out, as we've seen in some other areas. So let me ask you this. I know some people aren't too fond of statistics and demographic studies, and they question their reliability. And I know I appreciate you mentioning how you try to make sure that you verify the research there on the ground. I think that's highly important. How much would you say a planter should rely on demographic studies when they are choosing the city? Do you think, I guess more where the question is going to, should they rely more on the demographic studies and the numbers, or just kind of like a gut feeling of where they should go?
Wow, what a great question. I think my discovery has been, as a guy rides through communities where he's feeling a leading, my experience has been that most of the time a missionary church planter will develop a strong spiritual burden for a particular community or people group. So I think that's the greatest aspect, is the call of God. Church planting is very, very difficult. They're very, very high highs. They're very, very low lows. And if a planter is not convinced he's been called by God to be a missionary to a particular people group, when the going gets tough, he'll have a tendency to give up and quit. So I think the call of God and burden for a particular demographic, a particular people group, that is primary. And then secondly, the demographic data simply helps him to understand the folks to whom he has such a great burden. So we use the demographics to help us to understand where the most unreached fish are. But that's not a total controlling factor. We need the guidance of the Holy Spirit to carry us into the depths of lostness where God has equipped us, wired us, and through our own experiences prepare us to reach those people with the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's kind of an approach that we take. So while the demographics are informative, they're not determinative.
Gotcha. That makes complete sense, and I think it really kind of builds in even to the next question. The demographic studies are really a tool. I mean, they're in the planter's toolbox to really help them assess and understand, so they know what types of ministries they need to start and how to really present the gospel in a way that this group understands. So in your experience of what you've done in our state, which of the demographics do you think are some of the most important for a planter to pay attention to? Because you can get a demographic study, like you said, this percentage loves this restaurant compared to this one, or they have this kind of car compared to this, and you can get all kinds of studies on different areas. But when we think of things like income and household size and religious beliefs and some of those, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 you think a planner should really pay attention to as they're developing their toolbox of demographic studies?
Sure. I think socioeconomic strata is a critical piece relative to income levels. If you and your students would imagine with me an onion, and let's say we divide that onion into 3 equal parts, and then we divide those 3 equal parts into 3 parts also. So we end up with an onion that has 9 different strata or parts, if you will, lines straight across, if you will.
Yeah.
What we know from our experience is that most churches are most effective at reaching any 2 connecting people groups or socioeconomic strata there. For example, most churches will reach, if they're targeting, say, a group that is found upper middle class and lower upper class, or 2 connecting groups. The upper middle is one, the lower upper is the other. Now there reach a few people above and a few people below, but by and large, most churches across our state, their most effective, their sweet spot is reaching any 2 connecting groups.
I see.
So therefore, I want to understand the area I'm targeting. What is the primary socioeconomic strata there? Now, going back to what I said earlier, I need to know myself. I was raised very blue collar. I would probably not be the ideal person to reach people in a country club, because there are different socioeconomic strata from which I came, from which I was raised. For example, in the country club, the way you mow your grass is you stripe it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Very equal stripes. Well, where I'm from, you can just move the goat. You know, striping is something you've never heard of where I'm from.
Yeah.
So I have found that most of the people that I lead to Lord Jesus one-on-one are people who are also blue-collar like me and like I was raised. So I probably would not be the ideal candidate looking at the socioeconomic levels of a country club type setting or people that live in those kind of homes. Now, I can share the gospel there. I can communicate, and I can reach many of them, but it will not be my sweet spot, if you will, where I will be most effective. So I think the economic data is important. I think family is important. The area there near where you are, Dustin, I know that over 50% or right at 50% of the families there, the homes there, are led by an unwed mother.
Yeah.
Or the mother is the head of household. So that communicates something of need as well. So I think family structure, I think education is a part of it. It's very, very important. We need to make sure that we can relate well to those people and understand the way they speak and the way that they think. So I think those are 3 key areas that we have found very, very important.
Yeah.
And then finally, to understanding the spiritual dynamic of the given area. You know, it's like the parable, of the different soils. And we find that some communities are more open and receptive to the gospel than others. A guy might just can't seem to get anything done in one area, but he might move 3 miles down the road and find there people are spiritually receptive to the gospel. So through our research that we have done, we know, for example, the area there near your university is 71% unreached. We know that some of those are religious but not evangelical. Others of those are spiritual but not evangelical. And others are not evangelical and not spiritual. So we have these different categories that we understand about fish in that pond, if you will. So we need to understand different strategies, develop different strategies to reach those different kinds of people with the gospel. So I think those 4 things all together are probably the most critical pieces that we would look at most often.
Yeah, and because when you're talking of socioeconomic and family and education, I mean those are all areas of the church that a church really focus on. We focus on discipling families, so you need to know if there is a lot of dads missing, because that's a missing hole in a child's discipleship. We need to know socioeconomic, because you may not want to have the flashy lights and that sort of ministry in an impoverished area where people can barely afford to get a taxi to come to church or anything, and so. And you may need to start a hunger ministry before you start a Sunday school. There's different things things that I think all those really play into and really help. And I do thank you for sharing. As we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else as far as demographic studies that we didn't cover in this conversation that you think would be relevant for a planter?
I would say that we, as Southern Baptists in North Carolina, we do want to be a resource to missionaries, like in your class there, to you and others who lead them and equip them, and then to them as they go. So feel free to call upon us for demographic data. We know the contracts are very expensive. Most churches might not be able to afford a contract with a demographic company. We have contracted with 3 different companies in the past. We have incredible detail in these areas. But because our state convention of 4,300 partnering churches working together to acquire these kinds of tools, now we're able to make them available at no cost to your missionary planters there.
Wow.
So feel free to call upon us. We're here to serve. That's why we exist. And our goal is the effectiveness of your missionaries that you're equipping there. So any of this data that we can share with your guys, please feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to help out any way that we can.
Excellent. Well, I do appreciate it, and we appreciate your partnership, and even as you were just describing, us, the willingness for us to reach out to you and help. There are a few students here in the class that are pastors of existing churches, and they want their churches to become church planting churches. And so we have students who are looking at revitalizing, getting their churches to become planting churches themselves, and also guys who want to do a new work. And so I think all those 3 areas would definitely, whether you're an established church that's been around for decades, still understanding and analyzing your community through demographics and just getting the feel of it and just asking some fresh questions, and just really falling back in love with the community and what their needs and desires are. It helps established churches, it helps those who are revitalizing, and it really helps those who are planning a new work. So Mark, I thank you so much for your time. I thank you for your heart for the Great Commission, and we here at Piedmont greatly appreciate what the NC State Convention does. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we have benefited from the work that you folks have done to help planters, since we have several in the area. And one of your churches from probably 12 years ago, 121 Church, meets on our campus with Pastor Will Plitt, and so they meet right here on Piedmont's campus. And I know that they did a lot of partnership with you folks, and still do in a lot of ways. And so we are directly benefiting. And so I just wanted to thank you, and thank you for your time today to discuss the just looking at demographics. You don't have to be a math genius to realize that 71% of the people in your community don't know Jesus. That just says every 7 out of 10 people you see, they probably don't know Jesus, so share the gospel. And so if it's just as simple as that, then we can definitely, anyone can use demographics today. So